All right, welcome, general music class of Greendale Middle School. This is just a conversation I'm having here with my brother. This is Jeremiah Barkdoll. Jerry's going to school at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah, and he's studying audio engineering. So I thought it was a good moment for us studying music tech to have a bit of a conversation. Do you want to introduce yourself any more than that, Jeremiah?
Uh, yeah, so like my brother said, I go to Belmont and yeah, I'm a sophomore audio engineering student. So this is my second year of being here. So yeah.
Sweet. All right. So let's just start really basic. What is a day in the life of you as a college student in general and as an audio engineering student in particular? What does that look like? What do you do?
Yeah, so typically my day, it's kind of different than the average student, at least at Belmont. So essentially I have some classes that are down in the city where I go to the studio and I'm like working with some studio equipment and like working with other students to like record things or do things
Wow.
like that. So yeah, that's kind of the more audio engineering side of being a student here and yeah, so get
That's
to
awesome.
record things and set up speakers and stuff like that. So.
Okay, so those studios are recording like those are those owned by Belmont or are those like just for random uh who records there? Like,
Yeah, so the ones that they own are have like a lot of history of people recording in them. So people like Johnny Cash and Elvis have recorded in these studios before. Um, but Belmont now owns them. So they just primarily use them for students just come in and use them for school projects or use them to just record. Like I could just rent it out for my own personal use if I wanted to as a student at Belmont. So
oh wow.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, it's pretty neat.
Okay, cool. So your major is audio engineering. That's the official title, right?
Yeah, audio engineering technology.
Technology. Okay. And so is that what are some of the like core hard-hitting classes that are a part of that degree program? What do you study?
Yeah, so the I would say the main two, at least right now, for where I'm at in the program, are live sound reinforcement, which essentially means like live concerts, live events with, like microphones and speakers and like sound consoles and stuff like that. Um, which is yeah, it's geared more, to the live side of the things, and some of that dips into like broadcasting, so like TV, audio and stuff, like the audio that you hear whenever you're watching TV. Some of it translates over into that because that's more of a live element type of thing.
Sure.
Um, so that's, I would say, the main or one of the main ones. The other main one is just called audio one recording. So it's essentially like it's more studio work. You go into a studio, you set up the microphones for the instruments. You go into the control room and like gauge all the volume of all the mics, and then you record, and it's more that side of things. So those are the main two. There is, I guess, kind of another aspect of like designing systems, or designing speakers or
Oh, interesting.
microphones. That's a big side of audio engineering too, is yeah, like working with like companies to make new mic types of microphones. And there's some classes that kind of teach you and um, how to do that. I haven't really gotten to those classes yet, so I don't really know what that's like, but that is definitely another side of it.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
You've mentioned before like there are like you'll have to take some math stuff or science oriented. Are those kind of grouped into those audio focused classes or are those more general?
Um, they're more general, I would say, but I would I think that like the professors in the audio and like audio engineering side try to use like science, especially physics, because sound is very much reliant on like how physics work and like just,
Hmm.
you know, yeah, a lot of it is about like reflections of sound and a lot of audio engineering stuff is about reflections and absorption of sound and how sound acts inside rooms or like
Huh.
acoustics essentially. So physics plays a lot into that, and you have to take physics courses as an audio engineering student. Um, so yeah, that's the main science course for audio engineering for sure. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Say more about re reflection and absorption. What does it mean for sound to be reflected in a place?
Yeah, so there's essentially, let me remember real quick. Reflection, absorption, diffusion, diffraction. There's four ways for sound to interact with something.
Hmm.
So the first one is, well, not first, but one of the main ones is reflection. So if you're in a room, if you're like in a bigger room and you like clap your hands and you hear the sound coming back to you, which can sound like, echoey, or can sound like people call it reverb, where it's like makes it sound like a big space like open, and you can hear the sound like it doesn't just stop when you clap, like it comes back at you.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
those
yeah.
are reflections because the sound is bouncing off the walls into space and then hitting back at you.
Huh.
And then there's absorption. So if you were in like a room that had carpet all over and you were to clap, it would like sound pretty dead, right? And that's because the
Sure.
sound is like getting absorbed into the like carpet on the walls and the ceiling.
Huh.
Um, so that make it more like dead. And then there's diffraction, which is sound actually bending around. This is a little more complicated, but essentially sound can bend around an object.
Huh.
It's kind of complicated and it's hard to explain
Sure.
why it does that. But and then there's diffusion, which is also really hard to explain. So I probably won't actually go over
That's
that
fine. That's fine.
because
That's
there's a
fair.
lot into that. But it's kind of absorption and kind of diffusion at the same time.
Huh.
But anyways,
That's fascinating. Cool.
yeah.
Let's switch modes for just a little bit.
Yeah.
This past summer you had an internship doing a thing related to your degree. What did you do? What was that like? What were fun parts of the job or challenging parts?
Yeah, so I worked for this like live concert production company. So essentially, I would like pack up speakers and microphones and like audio and like lighting systems into trucks, and then we would take that to like a venue and we'd set up a stage, we'd set up the speakers for the, like a concert type thing. We would
Hmm.
essentially like build concerts, or at least the venues for concerts.
Huh.
And yeah, it was really cool. I was mostly in the warehouse, like checking in all the rental speakers and microphones and doing that type of thing. But occasionally I would get to go out on the actual site where we would build like the stage and the speakers and stuff. And that was really, really fun because you get to kind of like work with your bosses on like, oh, how is this gonna all work? And how are these speakers gonna be, strapped to the ceiling? And it's all this different stuff that they have to think about. So yeah, it's just like setting up concerts essentially, and yeah, that
Okay.
was the main gig.
So your job was mostly the schlepping, the moving bits and pieces around and connecting. You would connect the speakers to power and to the audio board, but you wouldn't run the soundboard.
Yeah, yeah, to get to running the soundboard, you kind of need to like show that you have experience in that before, which I
Yeah.
have a little bit, but just not compared to like because it's like professional. It's like supposed to be professional, and I'm not quite there yet. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would mostly just like connect like microphones. Like I would plug in microphones and then run the cable over to to get it to the board so that it can go through the speakers. I would do things like that and connect the power. And
Yeah.
um, one gig, which is a this is kind of a crazy story. There's this big conference in this big like auditorium place,
Okay.
and my company was doing some of the work for that, and they needed more camera operators, which I've never done before. I had never touched like a professional camera, but they asked me to do it, and I was like, okay, cool, why not? We'll just
Okay.
go. And so I went, and then at the end of it, the guy who like led the camera stuff, um, at the end of it, he was like, "You could do this professionally." And I was just like, "I've never touched a camera before this, so I don't know."
There you go. Huh.
But that was a really fun opportunity, even though it's not really audio related. Like
Sure.
it was still really fun to be able to do that though. So
Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Cool. So in your classes, or just in general, from what your experiences have been when you're in a live audio um, setup and you're running sound or you're setting up sound equipment, what are some of the issues that can arise? What are some of the problems, the basic problems you could face?
Yeah, so my professor likes to describe it as like there's like three steps to creating like a good audio thing. It's make sound, so make sure that the microphones are going through, and then
Okay,
it's make sure everyone hears that sound. So, you're going to be in venues where it's a pretty big space, and there's people who are way up, high in the audience, but it's going to be
okay,
hard for them to hear unless if you make it so that they can hear it. So you have to kind of think of how you can allow everyone in the audience to hear what you're trying to put out through the speakers.
sure.
So it's make everyone hear, and then it's make it sound good. So that's kind of the final step.
Okay,
But yeah, that's make sure that you're actually getting the sound like throughout the speakers, and they call it signal flow, but it's just like making sure that what's coming out of the microphones or what's going into the microphones is going out the speakers.
sure.
And then it's the other main thing is just make sure everyone can hear it.
Yeah,
Because if someone's back in the top of the audience, they still want to be able to hear it, even if it's not a great seat. They still want to be able to hear everything happening. So it's really
sure.
important.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Cool. Great. Okay, so you mentioned that those you had those two, the like studio oriented sound and the live sound. And we were talking as a class recently about how both of those places use microphones, but it's probably different how the microphones are used and stuff. But we didn't really go into naming those differences or talking about how uh going into it as an audio technician, what would that like? What are some of the main differences? Anyways.
Yeah. So with live sound, you typically use more sturdy microphones just because, you watch those singers who are like throwing their microphone around on the cable
Sure,
and
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
are screaming into it, and so typically for live sound you would use more like sturdy, more reliable microphones that wouldn't fail you in the middle of the show. And on the other side, studio, you're going to use like some pretty expensive, some pretty kind of more fragile, not necessarily like super fragile, but
Sure.
a little bit more. And then yeah, the also another thing is, I mean, you think about it in a studio, a lot of times you're doing one instrument at a time. So you'll like
Hmm.
have multiple microphones to one single instrument, um, depending on the instrument. It
Sure.
depends. But and then on like a live thing, you can really only have one because like if it's let's say a guitar, you can really only plug it into the amp. Or you can only put the microphone like in front of the amp so that you get the sound through that way instead of like having like a far away mic and also a close up mic for the amp, which you could
Interesting.
do in studio.
Sure.
So yeah, it's more like where you put the mics. So you could put the mic far away from the instrument or closer, in the studio, depending on what you want. But in
Sure.
live, it's a little bit more limited to just making sure that you can actually hear it for everyone to hear,
That
if
makes
that
sense.
makes sense.
So would you say like in a studio you have a lot more control over the sound?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of yeah, I would say that's the main difference is you're able to control, how much you hear and from that instrument and what you want to hear from that instrument, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's cool. Okay. Great. All right. And just to finish off this conversation, what are some of the skills you've noticed that maybe people you see who are successful audio engineers or who are successful students in the program, what are some of the skills they have going into it? They can be like um, knowledge or like technical oriented skills or just life skills about like how they present themselves and how they show up. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, you mentioned showing up, and like I remember with my job over the summer, if you showed up early, people notice that. And like that also, if you show up early and offer to do help in other things than other than audio or whatever you're working on, then people will probably hire you back because they'll realize, oh, this guy just wants to make this show run well. Um,
Hmm.
so that's at least in the live aspect. Um, Also, just like using, hmm, let me think about it. Let me think about how to say this. Hmm. I guess like critically thinking or critically like thinking, but with your ears. That sounds weird, but like,
Sure.
uh, 'cause a lot of times when people are like listening to music, they don't really think about all the different processes that are going through an audio engineer's head. So, like,
Hmm.
well, especially on the studio side of things, you kind of have to be thinking about a lot of, we talked about mic placement. So
Yeah.
that's just another step in the process of recording someone. Um, and so if you had a singer who you knew like you knew that when they were going to come in, they were going to be like singing really loud, you'd have to think about, okay, well, I want a mic that's going to be both close to them and a little bit further away, maybe, or I want to do
Sure.
multiple takes. And so just kind of thinking like, I know that I'm going to have to probably change some things. And yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of thinking through of what you're going to hear. And yeah, it's a lot of, yeah, it's a lot of processing to do.
No, but that's really insightful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. Great. Is
Yeah.
there anything um thinking about your middle school self? Uh, is there anything you would like to share or impart as wisdom from a college student related or unrelated to the topic at hand?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in like audio stuff, then just like if there's at like basketball games, sometimes they'll set up like speakers for people to talk during, or just walk up to one of those people and be like, "Hey, I want to like help with this stuff, or I want to like learn more about this." So if you see people around and you're like, "Hey, I just want to learn more," and you're like respectful about it, people will show you, and you'll get to just like learn. I think it's like there's never like an early enough time to start learning about this stuff. So you should just ask people like, "Oh, how does this work?" Or, "Huh, I noticed that microphone, uh, I don't know, whatever."
Yeah.
You know. So I would say, yeah, just like if you see someone using like any type of equipment in audio or lighting or whatever, like just ask them and see. Yeah, I'm sure, unless if they're not very nice, but they should be nice. Especially for middle school. If the middle school is asking me about audio stuff, that's pretty cool. So if you're interested in this, just ask people about it, and they'll probably tell you. So
Sweet.
yeah,
Well, thanks so much.
yeah,
It's been yeah, this has been great. Yeah, I've learned a lot, and so just thanks for being willing to have this conversation. Makes
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And if any of the students have questions, you can ask or you can yeah, ask my brother to ask me, and I'll be happy to let you guys know or whatever. So
Sweet. Yeah, I will make sure to forward any questions they have on to you, and we can maybe do a um, at least email chain or something.
yeah, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye.